Hello everyone, welcome to my Call of Duty World War II Veteran Difficulty walkthrough, and this is Mission 7, Death Factory. And this is a pretty fun mission. It's a rather lengthy mission, and it has a mix of combat and stealth, more so than in the other missions. And later on, there's going to be a pretty nice change to the atmosphere to really benefit the horror aspect of this war. And this is really the one Call of Duty game that actually tries to capture a horror of a war with World War II compared to the other Call of Duty games. And I personally enjoyed that sequence because any section that feels reminiscent to a survival horror game that's present in an action game, it always feels like it has a lot of impact in my mind. And I think this sequence is done really well. But before that point, we have a couple of sequences, and this is one of them. So we're preparing for a defense sequence right here, and the game is giving you time to litter this whole environment with landmines. And the landmines are hit and miss, but I still recommend you plant them because they can help out in clearing out any stragglers. But I don't find them to be that useful because the enemy movement is so sporadic in this part right here that a lot of times not really trigger the landmines, and you have a limit to the amount of landmines. I thought it was unlimited, but you actually have a limit. And there's also another set of landmines right there in case you want to use it, but there's no point. And this is all pretty simple. I actually thought that this was going to be really bad in its designs because omniscient AI with very perfect aim that can hit you at long range, and they're far more efficient than any sniper. Like, it screams a recipe for disaster, but the enemies like to prioritize your AI more than you, and if only it worked like that in Call of Duty Classic, but it doesn't. And all I'm going to do for this sequence here is I'm going to stand in the back right over here, and I'm just going to pick off the enemies one by one using this sniper rifle, which is so powerful because it will one-shot kill every single enemy regardless of what body part you hit. If only the Kar 98K was the same. The Kar 98K on this game, it's inconsistent on its damage, just like in Call of Duty Classic, because most of the time it's a two-shot kill to get rid of the enemies, and when you're combining that with the iron sight that it has, and the iron sight isn't really my favorite. I think the iron sight on Call of Duty Classic is a lot better. It's not the most spectacular weapon, but this weapon really shines. Really, this is the only true sniper rifle in the game. I can't think of a single mission that I've done so far where I've been using a different sniper rifle. This is really the only sniper rifle I've been using, and it's such a shame because I find it a lot of fun to snipe in the Call of Duty games, so long as there aren't any infinite spawn moments, because obviously if there's an infinite spawn moment, you'll be forced to push forward. And I think this mission has a couple of infinite spawn moments, and I noticed this in the last part, or rather I didn't notice, I just assumed it was going to be the case with the last part of the mission, which is why I was pushing up very aggressively. So maybe I'm incorrect in that aspect, but I'm going to assume that it is an infinite spawn in the last part of this mission, but I'll get to that when I get the chance. So right here, you'll notice that when I'm at a far enough distance and I'm not aiming in on the scope, I can see the enemies. Like they have this black shade over them, like the lighting hasn't properly corrected itself, and I can deal with the enemies easily. It's just like in the previous mission where you were piloting that tank as Perez, and when you got to the theater, you could see the Panzerschreck guys from a very long range because the lighting didn't overlay correctly on the enemies when I was far enough away. It's reminiscent of those moments in games where you stand very far away from an enemy, and when you're playing a game at 60 FPS, there are times where when you're standing far enough away, the enemies themselves would be running at 30 FPS. It's similar to that. It must be some issue that this game has, but it's beneficial. Or it could be intentional, and they don't want you to take any cheap hits because, of course, you have a health system on this game that is entirely dependent upon medkits and not health regeneration. So they wanted to give you some kind of advantage like that, which, if that is the case, I approve. And I'm out of ammo on my sniper rifle, so I'm going to use my M1 Garand, and you'll need to keep this M1 Garand for the upcoming stealth section because the bayonet on this weapon will help in case you need a close call moment satisfied. And what I mean is, the melee on this game doesn't one-shot kill enemies. You just push the enemy back. And there are a couple of moments where you can instantly kill enemies with the melee, but I think it's dependent upon the body part you hit. And there are times where even when you hit a certain body part, it doesn't instantly kill them. It's not honest in the slightest, which is why you'll want the bayonet to get past that dishonest nature to the melee, and actually guaranteeing one-shots. Very useful for stealth sections if you need it. And the Panzer tank has appeared, and what I'm doing here is I'm sitting in that spot and I'm waiting for the bazookas to repopulate on that crate over there. And you need to hit this guy 3 times if you want to kill him, and when he dies, this will be the end of the sequence. And I believe this is the last shot right here, and There we go. And now you have a time to restock on ammunition, but I recommend you grab Zussman's medkit right here because we won't be reconnecting with Zussman for a vast majority of this mission. And you'll definitely want to use Turner in this part because you will reconnect with Turner at some point. And when you do, I believe his bar is fully depleted, so it's best to use Turner now while you have the chance. And this right here is the worst stealth encounter in the game so far, and it's for a couple of reasons. So the first thing is that the stealth only exists to complement the combat, and what I mean by this is even if you're trying to approach a sequence stealthily, when you get to a certain threshold of this entire area, it will trigger a mandatory combat encounter where everyone just knows where you are, and you'll have to start fighting back. And because of this design, you're forced to use the lure mechanic to lure enemies from their position where you cannot stealth kill them to positions where you can stealth kill them. Like right there. I don't know how you're supposed to stealth kill that guy normally, but he's facing in your direction, so you have to use the lure mechanic to get the drop on him, and then melee him with your bayonet. And this will actually attract the left guy because he's very slow to detect you, because when you're crouched, your visibility is greatly reduced, and you can get away with a lot of moments where enemies are looking at you from such a distance that makes it seem like they should be able to spot you, but because you're crouched or prone, they can't see you, and it's so strange that it would work like that. But it is helpful for this sequence. And just then, I used the lure mechanic again to pull that guy from that safe spot where he's at over to here. And the thing is that when the enemies are checking out where you were, they seem to ignore dead bodies more often. It's like in The Last of Us Part 1, where if you killed enemies and then you use a distraction to lure another enemy over near the dead body, they would actually ignore the dead body completely and just search for the distraction. It's similar to that. I mean, I have had times where the enemies have gone out of their way to sprint towards a dead body and investigate even though I was luring them. And if that happens, you gotta get rid of them very quickly. I don't know what happens if they fully complete the animation of investigating the dead body, but I would imagine it would cause every other enemy to assume an investigative status, and that'll cause them to go on very random paths. So you want to avoid that and just get rid of them very quickly. The game does give you some leniency with how long it should take for you to get rid of an enemy before he alerts the others. Like, you can get a red iron cross symbol, and a split second before the enemies fully detect you, you can melee them and stop them from fully detecting you, and every enemy will not be aware, and you can resume your stealth status from there, which is helpful. Now, this part right here, you gotta get rid of that sniper, and then you need to lure this guy who's coming towards me right now by standing up and then filling the iron cross symbol so that it's half full. And what this will do is it will cause him to try to go up the incline to get to my position, but you have to be sure that he doesn't spot you while you're trying to jump down behind him and get the drop on him, because he loves to do a lot of the turning animations, like in The Last of Us Part 2, where whenever the enemies were in an investigative status, they tended to do turning animations where they would look left or right, but not look behind them. But on this game, the enemies can kind of see you behind themselves, even though their backs are completely to you, and I don't know why he stopped right there, but I was very lucky. But this right here is very risky, because at any moment, one of those two guys right in front of me can choose to run towards the body, and right here, look at that. That right there was very close. I probably should have just waited right here and just waited for a while to see what he would do. But if I hadn't gotten prone just then, I would have been spotted. And look at that just then. That right there is a great example of the lenience that this game provides you with certain situations like that. And this part right here, it's kind of hard to get the drop on the enemies, because at times, they don't really pop that close to your cover position, so they'll be kind of far away from you, and you gotta be very fast when that happens. Now, what I'm going to do right here is, this is the part where it's impossible to stealth kill anyone now, so I'm gonna use a couple of my grenades to dispatch most of the enemies, and then I'm going to go back to this part right here, and I'm gonna hide, and I'm going to fire my gun right here, because your friendly AI don't seem to attack unless you fire your gun. It's some very odd scripting. I use my grenade system, which means I should have entered the combat status, yet my allies aren't doing anything, and they only ever attack when I fire my gun. Again, some really weird scripting on this section, and some really bad designs that do not complement the stealth aspect whatsoever for this part of the mission. And I just cannot believe that I had to utilize such awkward methods to actually deal with this section, just because it's a game by its very nature. Like, none of the actions I did felt very logical or actually smart, or actually benefited the stealth aspect in a way that actually made sense. Like, can you imagine actually doing this whole entire section stealthily without any hassle whatsoever? Why would you not favor that design as the base template for this section right here? It's so stupid. Like, the previous stealth missions were just little teasers here and there, like, but you weren't really doing much in those sections, and here's an opportunity to give the player the opportunity to dispatch a lot of these enemies in full-on stealth and not deal with any of the nonsense that is present with them because of how AI they feel in nature. And you're just going to scrap all that in favor of that kind of clunky design? What is that? It makes no sense. I cannot stand those kind of moments like that. It's like in Uncharted 1 through 3. There were stealth sections in Uncharted 1 through 3 that you just could not do in full-on stealth. And at first glance, it seems like you can do these sections stealthily, but you actually can't. Anytime you reach a certain threshold of a room, or you've been forced to kill the first wave of enemies in stealth, and then out of nowhere, a second wave of enemies trigger, and they know exactly where you are, it has never rewarded stealth at all. The stealth only existed to complement the combat. And I'm just like, in Uncharted 2 and 3, you've given us the ability to engage in full-on stealth, to put in specific animations for the enemies that are specific to a stealth status. Like Uncharted 1 didn't really have a good stealth system, and the stealth in that game was horrendous, but you're just going to give us that ability to go in stealth in Uncharted 2 and 3 and not allow us to delve into that system? Like, it's so counterintuitive and so paradoxical. It's like in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. What a horrendous game. That game, they evolved the stealth and combat mechanics, and when I'm talking about the stealth specifically, the stealth on Shadow of the Tomb Raider had a lot of different options, but they barely let you engage with it because that game favored like exploration and open world design, and barely any encounters with enemies. And it just led to such an imbalance between combat and downtime moments. Like, why are you going to advertise the changes you've made to the combat and stealth systems, yet you're not going to let us engage with the enemies? Like, when you're going to advertise it like that, it makes it seem like you're going to be putting a lot more creativity in your sections, and there's actually going to be opportunity for players to experiment with your systems and play, but they don't let you do it. And you can't even make any kind of critique about the stealth or the combat because there's barely any of it. That's what it felt like when I was doing that very awkward stealth sequence, and all I'm going to say is it's completely unacceptable, and why they opted for that kind of design, I will never know. But this is an actual stealth encounter that I'm doing right now, and it's actually given a nice little aesthetic with its atmosphere. So it's very foggy, it's very windy, and it's not quite sunny, but it's still kind of daytime. And you're trying to hide from these enemies, you're trying to sneak through this whole entire area, and you have the choice of killing these enemies or engaging in combat, or just sneaking past them entirely like a ghost. And you're just seeing all the horrors of this war that's happening right now. You're seeing the Germans do a lot of these terrible things. And I just think it's a nice change of pace. And you really don't get a lot of these kind of sections in Call of Duty games. A lot of times it just escalates into combat, and the times where they do reserve the horrors of war, they reserve them in sequences where you're not engaging with any enemies. But this felt different just then. And that right there, I don't know what that was just then, but I did not anticipate that guy walking all the way, so you gotta move further back into that cover, and somehow, even though it wasn't really a split second when I killed that guy after the red cross appeared, I was still somehow able to kill him without any of the other enemies being alerted. That was very odd, and you notice that I didn't have a bayonet. I was using my melee on the M1911, and the melee doesn't kill instantly on this game, so I could have been spotted very easily. But that didn't happen, and we've now reunited with Turner, and we've gotten past this whole entire section. That right there is the best path to take when doing that section, and we are going to be encountering a sniper rifle. And I quite like these kind of moments in Call of Duty games where it's just small skirmishes, and this is something I was going to make a point of originally in my Black Ops Cold War walkthrough, but it slipped my mind. I don't like any of the hectic battles in Call of Duty whenever they stay around for a very long time. Like, the chaotic battleground, where you're just fighting tons of enemies, they just feel very messy and sloppy, and there's not really a story that's being told. But I just feel like with these small moments of horror, or these moments where you're in small skirmishes with the enemies, like, it doesn't feel so muddy or dirty or just hard to really track, that it feels like there's a story behind all this, and I really like the change of pace with these kind of sections. And there's only a handful of enemies that you're dealing with, and if it was any more, I think this sequence pacing would be severely impacted, but it's not. And there is going to be a moment where you have the ability to do a heroic action in order to save a guy, and I'm going to use a smoke on it, but I used it a little too late, and this right here, look how much damage that sniper does. I had to use 2 med kits in order to fully heal myself, and I'm going to use a smoke bomb right over here. And you'll notice, like, look how long I'm waiting right here. That's the amount of time you want to wait when you're trying to wait for the smoke to fully envelop an area and actually complete its animation, so that you do not get killed by the enemies too quickly, or you at least have a better chance of surviving. And then this sequence right here, there's about 3 enemies in this section, and a 4th guy that's going to sneak attack you, and then you have to deal with the sniper, and that's the end of this section. Turner is not going to help here. I have some hilarious moments in this section, where I'm sitting in this area, I'm listening to footsteps, but the footsteps are completely honest, and Turner isn't doing anything, so those 2 enemies killed me at least 3 times, because Turner wasn't doing anything, and he's sitting right there, just waiting for the enemies to come right towards him, and he's just not shooting his gun. Like, it's a very long corridor. Like, look how long this corridor is. Why is he not shooting them? Yet again, another great example of the incompetence of the AI at times. Ooh, this right here, you're going to take damage here. I don't know if you can kill this guy before he actually does this programmed sneak attack, because it takes off half of your life, and I'd imagine the developers had to put in some kind of way of fighting back, because half of your life, that is a lot of life. Imagine if you didn't have that amount of health, you would be dying on that sequence so much. But I guess that's why the game provides you a med kit before that moment. And like I said, if the game is going to provide you med kits on veteran difficulty, then that right there is a great example of a developer that understands how to design a difficulty mode around a health-based system where you're relying more on med kits and health regeneration. Like, imagine in such a sequence where in Call of Duty Classic, and you didn't have like 50% health and no med kits. Like, you'd be soft locked essentially. You'd have to restart the whole entire mission and go through that whole entire section of the mission to actually get back to that point where you can actually survive. How is that good game design? I will never understand with that game. That game is so bad when it comes to veteran difficulty. Now, this right here, there's going to be a very awkward transition that's going to happen because the checkpoint's going to trigger while I'm in the air. I don't know why the checkpoints behave the way they do, but the checkpoints in Call of Duty games, they tend to give you checkpoints during moments that don't make any sense. Like in Black Ops Cold War, there were moments where the checkpoint would respawn me in the middle of me in the animation of getting a human shield. Or in this case, I get a checkpoint while I'm in the air. So when I restart, I'm actually falling down, and I'm progressing onward. It makes no sense for checkpoints to work like that. I could understand checkpoints triggering at the beginning of sections or in certain situations where there are no enemies nearby, but why is it that the Call of Duty games never give you the ability to manually save, or at least utilize a manual save system to bypass any problematic autosaves? That to me is just common sense. Like, do you have any idea the kind of dangerous situations you could be put into with these checkpoints that just occur sporadically at best? Like, Call of Duty Classic, the checkpoints were horrendous. The amount of times I would die because the checkpoint spawned me in the middle of an enemy attacking me, and I would always lose my health so quickly. So unfair and so badly programmed, and they still utilize the same checkpoint system to this day, but it's nowhere near as problematic as in Call of Duty Classic. And by the way, you want to be crouched right here because there's a guy in the window in the building to my left that can shoot you if you're not crouched. And right now, I'm just taking the time to clear out these enemies that are in the barn. And there's a guy up there, and then there's also a couple of enemies down below, and when you push forward, there is an opportunity for a heroic action, and it's on your right, but don't push too quickly. There are still a couple of enemies in this room right here, and there's also some enemies outside that can shoot you while you're inside of this barn, like right outside that doorway over there. And when you kill these guys, make sure you're checking around your corner, because right here, this guy decides to sneak up on me, and I take him out, and somehow I'm not getting shot by this enemy. Lucky me. But that's just how random the AI can be at times in the Call of Duty game. And there are also a couple of enemies right there, right near that doorway. I try to throw a grenade here, and I think I killed this guy. Yeah, I do. And then there's also an enemy that will set up in a cover position right in front of the building I'm heading towards. And then there are at least 3 or 4, not 3 or 4, sorry, like 4 or 5 enemies in this next building coming up. And you can get the drop on them easily. I recommend throwing smoke here. I bounce the smoke off this wall over here so that I can sneak past this guy, and somehow he doesn't hit me. I tried to use a grenade here, but it misses, and then this is where I decide to use my smoke. Like, if the smokes actually behaved like this consistently, I would have no problems with this game, but considering that they're not like World at War or Black Ops Cold War smokes, you have to really use these smokes during very specific moments. And there's 2 enemies on the ground floor, and then there's going to be like 3 enemies up above. So right here, this guy's random. He comes down the stairs, but I take him out. And then I'm just going to bum rush these enemies because they're preoccupied with my allies. And the MP40 is so good for running and gunning. It's definitely my favorite assault rifle in the game. I think it's an assault rifle or is it a submachine gun? I can never identify the proper distinctions between the two. But the MP40, like the Germans definitely know how to design good weapons. Like the iron sights on the MP40 are fantastic. The recoil doesn't feel so problematic, and it's just a very damaging weapon. It's been like that since Call of Duty Classic, and it's the same in World at War. Black Ops 1, you didn't really use the MP40 that often, aside from the moments where you went back to World War II. The MP40 was pretty reliable in the zombies mode, but it's just such a good weapon. Like you cannot sleep on this weapon. It's such a fantastic weapon, which is why I always prioritize it over the grease gun or the Thompson, for instance, because I'm not a big fan of the iron sight on the grease gun, and the Thompson's damage is pitiful. But this weapon is great in every aspect compared to those weapons. Now, right here, there's a final skirmish with the enemies, and all you need to do right here is just stay in this building and snipe the enemies. I don't recommend using the hole that's in the corner of the building. I think it's best to use this window over here, and then at some point, once enough enemies have been killed, you're free to prioritize the enemies that can only be seen through that hole in the corner of the building, right over there. And once again, I'm standing far enough away and I'm not scoped in, so I can actually see these enemies. The lighting just doesn't overlay on them correctly, so they really stand out against the fog and the darker, muddier environments. And here comes a half-track, but I don't even know where this half-track is. Like, my allies take out this half-track, and I'm just prioritizing the rest of the guys. And I'm not too sure how much damage these snipers do, because I have been one-shot killed by the enemies. There are some rifles in collateral damage, for instance, that could one-shot you, and I think the snipers on this section can one-shot you as well. So in the event that they can one-shot you, just exert additional caution with them while you're doing this section. And once the game says that the Germans are retreating, it means this is the end of this mission. But before I conclude the commentary, let me show you the bloopers that I encountered with Turner in that one sniper section. And this right here, I don't know why Turner is so passive in this part. Like, I'm checking to see where the enemies are, and this enemy comes up behind me, and Turner's just standing right there, not doing anything. And then the same situation happens again, where I'm checking to see where the enemies are. I'm listening for the footsteps, but the footsteps are very dishonest, and Turner's not doing anything. But just don't trust the AI in this part, and just do exactly what I did in this walkthrough, and you'll be fine. Stay tuned for the upcoming missions. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.